These are the 6 properties you should be avoiding as a property investor. If you're new to property, then you want to be giving yourself the best chance to succeed, and the properties I'm going to talk about are either risky, not as profitable, or both. So if you stay away from these 6 investments, most likely you'll be fine. The first one comes from personal experience, and that's buying a new build. When I bought my first property in 2013, I made every mistake I now talk about not making, but buying a new build was probably the biggest mistake out of them all. If you think about it, when it comes to property investing and making money from it, you do that by adding value to the property. So refurbing it, adding a new bathroom, a new kitchen, basically turning an ugly house into a new house kind of thing. But if you're already buying a new build that's already got these new things in place, then the truth is that you won't be able to add that value and make money on it, at least in the short to medium term anyways. And not only that, according to the land registry, so pretty legit stats, the average price of a new build is 29% more than existing housing. So that means you overpay nearly 30% from the start. So when it comes to an investment point of view, that naturally means lower rental yields and less capital growth or room for capital growth in the future. For context, the 2-bedroom new build I purchased for £105,000, if you take away the 29% premium that new builds statistically have, right? A similar 2-bedroom property in a similar area, just not a new build basically, would have only cost me £74,550. That's a massive difference. Also, not to forget that new builds tend to be on smaller plots of land, making it less attractive to potential tenants or buyers in the future when the house eventually loses its new appeal. So new builds are a no for me. So when you own a property and the land it's built on for as long as you want, that's called a freehold property, and they're fine. But the ones that aren't are leasehold properties, where you own the property for a set period but not the land it's built on. Usually they're more common with flats, but you can get some leasehold houses too. And to be honest, it's not that leaseholds are bad, right? It's just they're not good. The first thing is that with leasehold properties, you don't technically own the property. Usually leaseholds come with an agreement that tells you how many years you'll own the property, and this can be anything from 900 years as an example all the way down to 40 years. But the fewer years it has on the lease left, the harder it becomes to sell the property. So it's like you may not even benefit from the property's price increasing, and there's no magic number as such, but when the lease falls below 80 years, the cost of a lease extension increases dramatically. So really 80 years is when people tend to call it the dangerous territory when it comes to leaseholds. There's other annoying things as well, like you have to pay service charge and ground rent to the freeholder, which tends to increase over the time. Also, you need permission from the freeholder to change the property. So really, you just bought a property, put down a decent deposit for something you're effectively renting, and are at the mercy of the freeholder. So if you ask me, are leaseholds really worth it? I don't think so. The third one, I nearly made the mistake of buying myself, and I'm so glad I didn't, which was off-plan properties. On paper, it sounds like a good idea. Buy a property that's brand new. You can even choose your ideal plot, buy it at a discount because you're an early bird, and by the time you move into the property, it's worth more than what you paid for. And if the company's feeling extra generous, they'll even pay for your stamp duty and legal fees. That's how they market it. But here's the truth. We'll get back to the video in 7 seconds, but 89% of you watching this video aren't subscribed to my channel. Please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and in return, I'll be sharing everything I learned on buying more properties in the next few months, and you can get to learn from my mistakes for free. And now, back to the video. We already know now that new builds aren't the best investment. A lot of the time, off-plan developments are delayed, so by the time you've moved into your house, you haven't really got it at much of a discount. And depending on when you buy it and the size of the development, you could end up living on a development site for a long time, sometimes even up to years and years. But the main risk out of all of this is that ultimately you're betting on a developer to see the development through. And some of you may already know that these big off-plan developments, they may be lucrative, but they also are very risky. Like if the developer goes bust, like a lot of them are at the moment, then you're basically screwed. And yes, you could say I'm being dramatic, and you might be right, but there are so many other better opportunities out there that are less risky. So for me, it's not even worth thinking or considering, especially because these off-plan developments are new builds. So I read somewhere that 1 1.5 million British residents own a property abroad. And that kind of surprised me because there's so many horror stories of overseas properties going wrong. I remember Ant and Dec, I think it was, lost £2.5 million each when they bought luxury villas and the company went bust. Philip Schofield was another one. He had the same problem. When you're buying a holiday home for yourself, I get that, especially if it's a place you're going to go to all the time, and especially because you're used to it or you're familiar with the area. But the overseas properties I'm talking about are the ones where you see those ads or estate agents try to impress you with these new markets that they see as investment hotspots. It's happening with Dubai right now, and I'm not saying that Dubai is going to have the same fate, because I actually like Dubai. For a few years ago, Bulgaria and Spain, that's where the hotspot was. That's where people were rushing and investing. And if you look now, prices have dropped a lot in both countries and thousands of homes are empty. All I'm saying is be careful of what you get into, especially with Brexit, and if your chosen destination is within the European Union. There's also the exchange rate issue that I don't think many people really understand how much of an effect it can actually have. So say you plan to buy a property in France for 200,000 euros in July 2015, when the exchange rate at the time was 1.42, that would have cost you £140,000. Nice, right? Or if you purchase the same property a year later in October 2016, that same property would now cost you £181,000, so over £40,000 more, all because of the exchange rates. I know exchange rates are confusing, but all you need to remember is that for a British buyer, if the pound goes down, the property price abroad goes up, and even the laws are different in each country. Spain, for example, has some strange rules like the land grab laws or whatever it's called, and if you're not aware of these things, they can catch you holding the bag. So if you do decide to buy a property abroad, first consider doing it in the UK, where you know the rules, you know the country. Yeah, you could potentially make more abroad, but you could also lose a lot more, or even all of it. Let me leave you with a quote from the greatest investor, Warren Buffett, which is: the first rule of investing is don't lose money, and the second rule of investing is don't forget the first rule.
The first rule in investment is don't lose. And the second rule in investment is don't forget the first rule, and that's all the rules there are.
The next one I would personally avoid is flats. Now, if you're converting a property to 2 or 3 flats, or if you're buying a block of flats, they're all fine. But what I'm talking about is if you're preferring to buy a flat as an investment over a house. And I understand why people do it, because, you know, flats, they're cheaper, and investing in a flat, don't get me wrong, is still better than not investing at all. But if you could hold for a bit longer and save a bit more money, I would invest in a house over a flat every single time. And this is why, because I've said it early on, when it comes to property investing and making money, you do that by adding value. And unfortunately, you don't have that much of a scope with flats compared to a house, where you can do extension, convert an attic, add a garage, or even a conservatory. And because of that, you're limited to what you can do with flats, which means that houses appreciate more in value compared to flats. And I'm not just making this up, I've got the stats to back this up as well. In London, for example, figures show that prices for houses have increased by 23.4% since Feb 2020, while flats have fallen by 1.6%. There's other research which was done across the UK now, showed that both detached and semi-detached houses over the past 10 years have gone up in value a lot more than flats. I think those stats are good enough reasons to why I think the houses are better investments than flats. But if you're still not convinced, just be mindful that houses, they tend to be more popular for longer tenancies as well, and more attractive to families, because flats are usually seen as a stepping stone where they eventually then move into a house. And how can you forget flats, they're leaseholds? We've already talked about the extra baggage that leaseholds come with. The final property that I would avoid is shared ownership. And yes, it makes it more affordable to get on the property ladder, I understand, because, you know, you'll need a smaller deposit and a smaller mortgage. But the thing is that you're liable for all of the charges you would expect to pay as a tenant: utility bills, ground rent, service charge, council tax. These all need to be paid by you. You still have to pay a mortgage on top, which is usually more expensive than a traditional mortgage, and you can't actually rent the house out until you own 100% of the property. So think about it, you don't really have much control over property that you technically own. And when you go to buy more shares of the property, which is also called staircasing, you gotta pay legal fees each time, and they're not cheap. And finally, shared ownership properties are leaseholds, and by now you should know what the crack is with leaseholds. Those are the 6 type of properties I wouldn't buy. And yes, you can still make money from them, especially if you hold it for long enough, because that's how property works. How I see it is that there's plenty of fish in the sea, right? Property, as hard as it is, so why make it even harder by investing in assets that aren't straightforward, that aren't the easiest? If you're new to property and looking to buy your first house, then you may want to check out my video on how to buy a house from start to finish. I'll post a link to it. You can watch it after this video. I'll see you soon.